happening right now. A federal judge considering whether to limit DHS use of tear gas near the Portland ICE facility. People who live nearby say they're suffering from the chemical gas seeping into their homes. Good evening. Thanks so much for staying with us for K2 News at 5. I'm Deborah Knapp.
And I'm Ray Casway. K2's Tanvi Verma is live outside the federal courthouse. Tanvi, you've been listening to arguments for hours now. What sticks out to you?
So, the plaintiffs established a couple key things. So the first is that a lot of people with disabilities live in those apartments, so they're disproportionately impacted by the deployment of chemical munitions. And the second is that those apartments are for people who are low income, so they really have no other place to go, even though they don't want to live there anymore. And that's not all. The witnesses who live at Grace Landing say they've been hit by rubber bullets just going to and from their apartment, that they've experienced PTSD, vomiting, chest pain, hives, and rashes. The federal government trying to poke holes in the plaintiff's case, specifically in the testimony of the plaintiff's expert witness, who's a doctor from the East Coast. The attorneys pointed out that she had not physically been there to make the causal connection between the deployment of munitions and the symptoms the plaintiffs say they were experiencing. They also pointed out that the witness protested against Donald Trump before. Before today's hearing, we spoke with a law professor at Lewis and Clark to break down the arguments each side would be making. Here's what he said.
They're, in some sense, saying, look, we're not part of this at all. The protests are noisy for us. The tear gas is making our lives miserable. We just want to, we don't want any of this to be negatively impacting us.
Attorneys for the government called attention to how the witnesses mentioned that protesters were causing chaos and how they don't have chemical munitions that help them assess what's happening. On the other hand, the plaintiff's expert witness states that the munitions travel indiscriminately and have the very impacts on people that the witnesses say they're experiencing. And this trial will continue next week. If the judge sides with the plaintiffs, that means that DHS will have a pause on how much they can use their chemical munitions. Reporting live in downtown, Tanvi Verma, K2 News.
Tanvi, thank you.
A federal hearing will continue next week over the use of tear gas at the Portland ICE facility. Residents living in a nearby apartment complex are suing DHS. They say the gas is affecting their health. They're asking the judge to limit when agents are allowed to use it.
We certainly have a lot to dig into tonight. Tanvi Verma will break down the arguments presented in court today.
We'll check in on a second lawsuit and temporary restraining order in place over the use of force by federal agents against protesters outside the Portland ICE facility.
We'll also look back at a couple of tear gas lawsuits from the 2020 protests and how they played out for context.
Plus, the city of Portland deciding today to uphold a land use violation at the ICE detention facility.
K2's Jennifer Singh will break down what an administrative review of the violation found.
But first, let's get to Tanvi Verma, who was in federal court today for that hearing. Tanvi?
So, first things first, the context. The apartment building is a low-income complex. So one of the residents who testified today said they don't have centralized air conditioning, which is why they have to leave their windows open, which invites munitions into their apartment. She says even when they try to close it, as soon as they hear chaos erupting, there's still munitions that seep through. One resident even says she wears a gas mask inside of her apartment. Before the hearing began, we caught up with one of the residents at the apartment complex. He actually couldn't speak to us on camera because he said it hurt his voice too much from all the impact from the munitions. We spoke to another resident who told us a little bit about how he's been impacted.
And last year, since 2025, these protesters disturbing us all the time. They're using tear gas. I have a lot of health issue. I couldn't breathe 3 days, and always noise. We can't sleep. So this terrible, terrible time for us.
The federal government attempted to poke holes in the plaintiff's case, specifically in the testimony of the plaintiff's expert witness, who's a doctor from the East Coast. The attorneys pointed out that she had not been physically there to make the causal connection between the deployment of munitions and the symptoms the plaintiffs say they're experiencing. They also pointed out that the witness has protested against Donald Trump before. This trial will continue next week, and if the judge sides with plaintiffs, that'll mean DHS will have to pause the way that they're deploying these munitions until the court can decide the larger answer to the legal question at hand. Reporting live in downtown, Tanvi Verma, K2 News.
Tanvi, thank you. This is not the only challenge to the use of chemical munitions by federal agents playing out in the courts right now. In fact, last week, a federal judge granted a temporary restraining order blocking officers from firing off gas or munitions unless they face an imminent threat. The judge's decision said DHS has been indiscriminately using chemical munitions and must pause during doing so until further decision is made on the merits of the case. Also restricts the use of less lethal weapons unless legally justified. When asked for comment about recent use of chemical agents against protesters, DHS told K2 that rioters violently stormed the ICE facility and, among other things, also threw objects at law enforcement and rocks at cameras. The temporary restraining order is set to expire next week, but could be extended.
The use of tear gas during the 2020 protests also became a topic of debate, leading to lawsuits. Here's how a couple of those lawsuits played out for context. In October 2020, environmental groups sued DHS over the use of tear gas and other crowd control devices during the racial injustice protests. The federal lawsuit alleged the government violated federal environmental law by deploying an unprecedented amount of dangerous chemical weapons without assessing their environmental impacts. A district judge dismissed the lawsuit. In 2023, an appeals court ruled the environmental groups couldn't show the threat of tear gas use and the lasting effects of it were strong enough to overturn the district judge's dismissal. The protests by that time were over and the use of tear gas had ended as well.
In November of 2022, a group of 5 protesters settled a class action lawsuit with the city of Portland over the use of tear gas by Portland police during the 2020 protests. The suit alleged the city's officers indiscriminately used tear gas against protesters. It was originally filed in June of 2020. District Judge Marco Hernandez agreed with the group and ordered police to use tear gas only if lives were in danger. A couple weeks later, the judge restricted police in their use of less lethal munitions. Judge Hernandez later found the city had violated the order and imposed sanctions on the Bureau. As part of the settlement, the city agreed to a 14-month injunction on Portland Police Bureau's use of force and paid the plaintiffs $250,000.
Also developing tonight, the city of Portland has upheld a land use violation at the ICE detention facility in South Portland.
The property owner now has until mid-March to correct violations or face a hefty monthly fine unless the decision is appealed. K2's Jennifer Singh is live outside City Hall in downtown Portland tonight, and with more on what we know about this decision. Jen?
Yeah, Deb, right. So this decision actually comes 5 months after the notice of violations was issued to the Portland ICE facility. That was in September. Now, that was after receiving multiple complaints that were made to the city of Portland about the property owner of the ICE facility not in compliance with land use regulations. Now, after further investigation, they involved using the Freedom of Information Act to obtain information on ICE processing centers. The city says there was adequate documentation of those violations. Now, those violations include holding detainees at the building for more than 12 hours. According to federal records, there were 25 documented instances of detainees being held beyond that 12-hour limit or overnight between October 2024 and July 2025. Violations also issued in the notice included boarded up windows that block the ground floor view into the facility. Now, the property owner, like you said, has until March 16th to fix these violations or face a $934 monthly fee. However, the property owner can appeal to the city hearings office within 10 business days. And we have emailed the property owner for comment on the city findings and his plans moving forward, and we have not heard back. I've also reached out to the Department of Homeland Security and ICE for further comment, and I will have the latest updates for you on ArcPDX at 10 as well as K2 News at 11. But for now, live in front of City Hall at downtown Portland, Jennifer Singh, K2 News.
Jen, thank you for that. A minor correction to what I just said. The ICE facility is not a detention facility. It's a processing facility. As Jen said, the detention of some people there is part of the issue here. K2 is on your side following the 2 lawsuits over the use of chemical munitions outside that facility as they move through the courts. We'll also continue to follow the situation with the land use violations. When we're not on air, you can get the very latest updates on our website and the K2 News app.